At number 10 is Tigra, first appearing in her own Marvel comic book called The Cat in 1972. This superhero just doesn't get the spotlight very often. Considering she has been a member of the Avengers in the past, it would only make sense that she might appear more prominently in more recent issues, or even MCU movies. But sadly, her most recent appearance was in a supporting role in Avengers Academy between issues 1 and 39. Tigra's powers began as an experiment by Dr. Joanne Tumalo, who gave her powers attached to her costume, and in this form she was simply known as the Cat, but down the line is when she eventually mutated into Tigra, a human-tiger hybrid, through a mystical ritual. She was then bound to a race of humanoid cat people from the Middle Ages, which she could then transform into on command from her human form, using the cat's head amulet. She's a pretty cool hero, so I wonder why they haven't really brought her back in any big way. Maybe they found her too similar to DC's Catwoman, who knows. Next up at number 9 is Stingray, an oceanographer turned superhero who builds his suit in order to explore the depths of the ocean. He helps construct an underwater city covered by a glass dome which he uses to try and grow food for mankind. He first appears in Tales to Astonish number 95 in June of 1967, so he's just on the cusp of the golden age. Just about. This guy is no doubt an older Marvel creation, and if you haven't heard of him, you may not be alone. Although he has appeared as recently as the Iron Man 2020 event, he still only appears briefly as a side character facing off against Captain Barracuda. But at least the writers of that issue probably had the same thought as me, that he deserves to come around again. Once again, my hunch is that he's just a little too similar to DC's Aquaman, which might keep Marvel from giving him any more spotlight than they already have in more modern issues. Although his buddy Namor the Submariner, looks like a carbon copy of Aquaman. But Namor appeared for the first time in Marvel's first ever comic book, Marvel Comics number 1 in 1939, whereas Aquaman didn't appear until 1941. But I digress. It just seems that DC found a way to occupy the underwater superhero market, which keeps us from seeing more characters like Stingray and even Namor more often. At number 8, we have DC's The Question, or just Question. Like Stingray, this superhero first appeared in 1967, but isn't showcased very much anymore. Usually teaming up with the Blue Beetle, this superhero got his last solo series in 1987, lasting 36 issues. He originally had the secret identity of Vic Sage, but was later reimagined in the 2006-2007 miniseries 52, and his protege, Renee Montoya, takes over the mantle. This character is just a good old-fashioned fighter, only really having abilities in martial arts and I guess sleuthing since he's a journalist by trade, but he's just got such a simple and cool film noir kind of look, and it would be cool to see him in a lead role again. Again though, his abilities and look are strikingly similar to Marvel's Chameleon, so maybe by holding back on popularizing this character too much, they're just avoiding butting heads with their competitors. Once again, it's hard to tell. Okay, at number 7 we've got Marvel's Dominic Fortune, or Dominic Fortunov. This character is not only old in terms of his first appearance in the comics, but the character himself is aged to the point where it's known to be one of his biggest weaknesses. First appearing in Marvel Preview number 2 in 1975, this superhero needs a comeback for the sole reason that he's just a guy. He doesn't have any powers, but fought in World War II and always seems to be getting caught up in assassination attempts and weird odd jobs. Like one time when he had to babysit 3 drunken actors in Hollywood for a weekend and had to call the cops on them after things got out of hand. And after that, Fortune actually gets recruited to the Avengers by Nick Fury in 1959. He's just a good old-fashioned human superhero who runs into human troubles and stays in his lane, but ends up getting the opportunity still to support the superpowered Avengers with bazooka blasts and covert ops. At number 6, we have DC's Dr. Fate. This guy is old. He first appeared in More Fun Comics number 55 in 1940 and basically hasn't been mentioned again since his death in the Book of Fate number 1 in 1997. So yes, that's a long run, but still I'd like to see more of him. Dr. Fate is a superhero that's got so much going on and looks so cool that I don't know why he isn't used more often these days. His powers come from an incident when he, Kent Nelson, and his father were uncovering the tomb of ancient immortal Nabu, and Kent is basically trained by the ancient being and awarded with the Amulet of Nabu, a cloak, and a helmet. With the training and these items in his control, he has abilities ranging from magic manipulation and flight to invisibility, super strength, and resurrection, among others. It's just a really cool character based on real ancient myth, and I don't see any reason why Dr. Fate shouldn't have another comeback soon. Okay, number 5, Marvel's Gargoyle. This superhero first appeared in Defenders issue number 94 in 1981, but since then he's actually retired and settled down in Greenwich Village. He even opened a restaurant called Isaac's Oysters. But he did go for one more rip for old time's sake, aiding Iron Man on a mission to take down the android Korvac. But that's sort of been it for him. And what's cool about this superhero is that he was sort of meant to be evil, but just chose good. He was formed when Isaac Christians agreed to place his soul inside a cursed gargoyle and do the bidding of the six-fingered hand. This was all in exchange for his issues to be resolved. But then when he was tasked with capturing Hellcat, a member of the Defenders, he couldn't get himself to do it and defied the six-finger hand. And just sort of kept living on as this like possessed gargoyle who chose good. He kind of reminds me of Beast. He just has this super wholesome energy to him. And I just feel like he could do for more of that sweet, sweet limelight. At number 4, we have Zeta from Batman Beyond, and eventually the Zeta Project cartoon spinoff. The show ran from 2001 to 2002 as part of a spinoff to the Batman Beyond episode Zeta. This character is so wholesome and doesn't get enough attention, having been last seen 20 years ago in what would have been the final episode of the short-running series. This synthoid was built for the NSA to keep an eye on terrorist organizations, so his abilities are pretty extensive, being able to shapeshift into just about anyone to infiltrate and carry out covert ops with ease. He's a naive and friendly character who decides to go rogue after realizing that any one of his assassination targets could be innocent. Zeta had such a moment and clearly a huge approval rating since his one episode got him a whole series, but at a certain point the world forgot about such a good and powerful synthoid superhero that definitely deserves a comeback. At number 3, there's Warlord, a character the world hasn't seen since his death in Warlord Volume 4, Issue 12. But there should be some kind of revival of Travis Morgan, who is another character on the list who doesn't actually have any powers, but is just a very well-respected and decorated war veteran. He also looks a lot like Oliver Queen or Green Arrow, which could have had something to do with it. They sort of acknowledge this when they finally meet in the same comic, and all of the Seattle underworld mistake Warlord for Green Arrow and attack him on sight. But whatever the reason is, Warlord's legacy deserves to be acknowledged with another appearance of some kind. I mean, the lore behind the character is that in past lives he's been Sir Lancelot, D'Artagnan of the Three Musketeers, and Crazy Horse among other legendary warriors and soldiers. He's just a great human character with, might I add, a really cool costume and some badass accolades to boot. Bring him back. Okay, at number 2 on the list we've got Komodo. This superhero really was a flash in the pan, only appearing on and off for a few years and having her legacy end with her powers being stripped for a time until they're restored again by Cloud9 and Hardball, but that's sort of it. And I think the last time she's been seen is in the Fear Itself storyline, which wrapped up in 2011, which is 11 years ago now, believe it or not. But this character needs to reappear in some way. The superhero was first created because Melody Kusama lost her leg in a serious car accident, and none other than Dr. Connors from, yes, the Spider-Man series, decides to endow her with the regenerative powers of a lizard. Well, not only that, of course, she actually turns into a lizard fully and at will and gains super strength, speed, agility, stamina, all that good stuff. I think this story is a good one to retell because who doesn't love a good story where someone confined to a wheelchair is able to not only walk again, but fight crime and be pretty damn good at it. Okay, last on the list is just my personal favorite, arguably obscure superhero 3D Man. An athlete turned superhero, 3D Man mysteriously gained superpowers after being stripped of his 3 Olympic gold medals. I mean, he was taking steroids, but there's always room for redemption, right? This character first appeared in 1998 and no one ever really talks about him. And to be honest, I didn't even know he existed until I started writing this list. And I want this hero to get more spotlight primarily because I'm a sucker for early 2000s culture, and this character is just such a great time capsule for that period, where everybody was obsessed with 3D for some reason, with DVDs coming with 3D glasses in the case, remember that? And 3D Man has the same nostalgic look to him, with many of his appearances being colored in green and red. If you want to look him up yourself, you'll notice that he originally went by the name of Triathlon and later changed to 3D Man during the Secret Invasion storyline. This guy just looks so cool and hits home with some good nostalgia for me, as well as probably anyone from the Gen Z or millennial generations. And there's also just a silly factor there too. 3D Man needs to come back. Please, can we? Just for 1 second.
And for this list, starting off at number 10 is Magneto. Starting off this list with the absolute GOAT. Magneto has been around for a long time, and a majority of that time, he was a villain, or at best, an anti-hero. As the #1 rival of Professor Charles Xavier, Magneto's view of the world is pretty interesting given that he was the child of a Jewish family during World War II, and yet, after years of persecution for being a mutant, he believed his race to be superior to regular humans nonetheless, and that humans should be subservient or destroyed. Under this mentality, he led the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants as well as other groups against the X-Men and the Earth's heroes. Now everybody knows that Magneto is not someone you mess with. He has enough power and enough experience to stomp almost anyone. For example, while he has become more of just a hero nowadays, there's a point where he gets his heart ripped out by a villain called Uranos. But he keeps himself alive by using his powers to keep his blood flowing. He's just that insanely powerful. But being born around World War II and the rival to Charles Xavier, he's been up there in the age department since he was introduced, but always manages to decimate his enemies. Number 9. Cassandra Nova. Sticking with X-related heroes, we have the evil twin, or counterpart, or anti-self to Charles Xavier. Cassandra Nova isn't really a mutant, but she isn't really a person either. She is actually what is known as a Mumadrai, the spirit that is equal to the opposite of a person. Wrap your head around that one. This is about to get wild, so buckle up. Because of the genetic mutant potential of Charles Xavier, his Mumadrai was able to create a physical form for itself when Sharon Xavier was pregnant with Charles, making Cassandra basically Xavier's twin. Now Charles, even as a baby, sensed Cassandra as an evil presence, and he used his psychic abilities to try and take her out in the womb. Cassandra survived though, and so she spent decades as this terrifying mass of cells in a sewer, building herself a new body and planning her revenge on her brother. Cassandra has all the same telepathic powers as Charles himself, plus some telekinetic abilities as well. But being a Mumadrai, she has the terrifying ability to manipulate DNA, breaking it down, copying it, and being able to construct physical bodies. She can even phase through solid objects, regenerate insanely fast, and enhance and evolve other mutant abilities. Number 8. Granny Goodness. Stepping away from Marvel for a moment, Granny Goodness is probably the complete opposite of anything we would describe as goodness. She was originally one of the lowlies, which is basically the peasant class on DC Universe's Apocalypse. From a younger age, she was taken by Darkseid and raised and trained to become head of the Shock Troops and the Female Furies. She has the responsibility to bring young warriors from other worlds to fight each other to earn the right to be trained by her. But Granny Goodness also has multiple orphanages where she both trains and disciplines younger individuals looking for potential warriors for Darkseid. Now being a resident of Apocalypse, Granny here does have quite a bit of power. She has superhuman strength, speed, durability, and senses, as well as invulnerability and an advanced immune system and immortality. But being immortal doesn't necessarily save you from looking old as hell, which is why we get Granny Goodness. Number 7. Horticulture. You know, sometimes a group of villains comes along that just kind of makes me smile. And Horticulture, who first appeared in X-Men Volume 5, Number 3 in December 2019, are one such group. Horticulture is described on their wiki as a group of agrochemists, biotechnologists, and eugenic engineers who specialize in the genetic manipulation and propagation of all things botanical. So, to me and my tiny brain, I take that information and translate it to, it's a bunch of old plant scientist ladies. Because that's what they are. It's a bunch of older ladies who are seeking to radically depopulate humans from the Earth in order to bring the Earth and nature to a state of balance. With the climate the way it is right now, it's actually kind of an understandable cause, even if it's utterly insane. Using their know-how, they made biological modifications to themselves, like resistance to telepathy and extended lifespans, but they also developed technology to manipulate their environment, inhibit mutant powers, and generate illusions on men. But they also have experience as computer programmers, being able to access the Krakoan gateways and trade information with the villainous anti-mutant group known as Orcus. Number 6. Old Loki from the MCU. Alright, I'm going to step away from the pages of comic books altogether here. During the MCU's Loki show, Loki gets sent to the Void, where the whole place is basically filled with other alternate versions of himself. But he specifically became part of a group of 4 other Lokis. Boastful Loki, Alligator Loki, Kid Kid Loki, and the topic for today, Classic Loki. Classic Loki had a similar story to regular Loki from the Sacred Timeline, but when confronted by Thanos in Avengers Infinity War, this Loki decided to use duplication magic to survive the whole thing. He then spent a hell of a long time on a remote planet, ashamed of the nefarious things he had done over time. When he finally tried to return to see his brother, Thor, who he missed, he was an older man, and them meeting caused a divergent timeline, getting himself pruned and sent to the void. He has probably one of the best moments in the show. When Sylvie, Loki, and Mobius try to escape from the void, and the reality-consuming Alioth tries to stop them, Classic Loki uses his magic to create a true-to-life, massive illusion of Asgard itself, all while this weird version of Ride of the Valkyries was playing in the background, distracting Alioth and giving me just straight up goosebumps. Like, I am actually getting them right now just thinking about it. Like, it was such a cool moment. Satisfying. Number 5. Ra's al Ghul. Ra's al Ghul was born around 700 years ago, and thanks to the Lazarus Pits, he has been able to keep his body in working order. But he discovered the pits when he was an older gentleman and keeps the look of someone with a significant amount of years to him. After he came in contact with the pits, he eventually became a master martial artist and a master fencer, gaining a massive amount of wealth, and he started creating organizations to rid the world of crime, with his first being called the Demon, which the later League of Assassins is a branch of. Rage's purpose within the League of Assassins is to eliminate all evil in the world by destroying all of humanity and just starting all over. Obviously, that mentality means he routinely has run-ins with the superhero community, especially Batman, who he helped train. Rage has had many plans over the years that tried to destroy the world, and he has also beaten the entire JLA when he discovered Batman's notes. Now, with his years of experience and his vast amount of accumulated resources, this older fellow is a massive threat to both the heroes and the world. Number 4. The Joker. During the absolutely fantastic 3 Jokers storyline, we learn there have actually been 3 Jokers plaguing Gotham over the years, and among the 3 of them is the Golden Age Joker, and he is clearly much older than the other 2. Now, to be completely transparent here, whether this story is canon or not is an area of debate, so it's up to you if this one counts, but the Golden Age Joker, known as the Criminal, is the only one of the 3 Jokers to be a predominantly serious crime lord, and he even says that laughing and smiling is physically painful for him. Another thing that makes this entry a little arguable is that of these 3 Jokers, we don't know which one, if any of them, is the Joker. Even if only one remains in the end, the best part of this story is the uncertainty about which one is the one who started it all. Now, seeing as the Criminal is the oldest, classic version, he seems to be the one who started it all, creating more Jokers to mess with Batman. But the other 2 Jokers have been featured in incredibly important Batman stories as well. The comic really explores all of it, and if you haven't yet, make sure you check out Batman 3 Jokers as soon as possible. Number 3. Maestro. The Incredible Hulk has certainly been through the ringer in his decorated career, but few versions of the character are the living embodiment of that fact, like the Maestro. An alternate version of Bruce Banner from an apocalyptic future, this version of the character is far more intense and complex, but also much older. The best way to explain Maestro is to say that he is basically a smarter, older, villainous version of Dr. Bruce Banner, with all the powers and abilities of the original, but with a touch of nuclear radiation. He has much more of a cosmic and spiritual side to him than the normal Hulk does, but he is also twice as strong as Hulk is, and he retains all the intelligence of Bruce Banner, but with years and years more experience. Despite all that extra strength, brain power, and experience, he still gets outmaneuvered by the Hulk, who sends Maestro back in time to the site of the Gamma Bomb that created them. But even then, the Maestro's spirit remains on the bones left behind after the explosion went off and he came back to life. Number 2. Agatha Harkness. Like a few of these villains, when we first met Agatha Harkness in Fantastic Four number 94 from October of 1969, she was already elderly. She started out as the nanny for the newly born Franklin Richards, and using her magical powers, she even saved the Fantastic Four from the Frightful Four and a handful of other villains, and also helped Franklin when his powers first started to emerge. But she went on to have an interesting relationship with the Scarlet Witch, Wanda Maximoff, but also also her mother Natalia Maximoff. That's because this sweet nanny Agatha is actually an incredibly ancient sorcerer who was around to remember the sinking of Atlantis nearly 18,000 years ago. And she was probably the most powerful of the original witches during the Salem witch trials, an event that she actually supported as she thought it would cull the weak magic users who held them back. Agatha, like a lot of older villains, is pretty damn complex. She has helped out heroes on multiple occasions, but she's also done some pretty sinister stuff. But there's no doubt that she is much stronger than both heroes and villains first assume. Number 1. Baron von Strucker. Baron Wolfgang von Strucker was born in the 19th century, so he ain't a young fella by any means. He fought with the Axis powers during World War II alongside and under the Red Skull. He was a top villain at the time, not just for Captain America, but more prominently as an adversary for Nick Fury and the Howling Commandos. And that carried through after the war ended, as Strucker was instrumental in the rise of Hydra and then became the Supreme Hydra. He was even responsible for the corruption of S.H.I.E.L.D., using Hydra to completely take over large parts of S.H.I.E.L.D. itself. When Captain America returned, and then the Red Skull did as well, Strucker began to lose his leadership role within Hydra, and so he faked his own passing, choosing to instead manipulate events from the shadows. Eventually though, Strucker got the Death Spore virus, which is why he is on this list. He's old, and many people don't know he has this particular enhancement. While he is an excellent strategist, a highly intelligent, exceptional hand-to-hand combatant, swordsman and marksman who uses Hydra tech to live longer and be in top physical condition, the Death Spore virus bonded Strucker's DNA with the Death Spore itself, enabling him to be revived after passing away. He hasn't aged since getting the virus, he heals at an incredible rate, is invulnerable to minor injuries, resistant to toxins and disease, and he can even release the Death Spore virus from his body at will, taking his victims' lives nearly instantly if he chooses to. Number 10. Avengers 1 million BC, Earth 616. Alright, look, I promise this is the only Earth 616 story I'm mentioning, but given the team and the story, how can I not? The Avengers of 1 million BC came together in the prehistoric era to face Zagreb the Aspirant, basically a mad celestial. The team was made up of Odin Borson, wielding Mjolnir, the mutant Firehair, the avatar of the Phoenix Force, the sorcerer Agamotto, like the Eye of Agamotto, that guy, Fan Fei the Iron Fist, the first ever Black Panther of the Panther Tribe, a mammoth riding Ghost Rider, and Starbrand. They first appeared in Marvel Legacy #1 in 2017, and I'm not even going to explain the rest. Just go read it, please! Earth 76611, alternate history. In Fantastic Four Annual number 11 in 1976, Power Man knocked a vibranium cylinder into Mr. Fantastic's time platform, sending it back in time. The cylinder was split in two halves. The important to this topic half landed in occupied France in 1942 and created an alternate branching timeline, Earth 76611. In this alternate timeline, the socialist Germans used the vibranium to advance their war effort, successfully invading England in 1943 and even making it to Manhattan by 1944, taking over America by 1946. That's what half a cylinder of vibranium can do, apparently. The Fantastic Four realized what happened though, and through some confusing tomfoolery, they managed to prevent this timeline from replacing the Earth 616 timeline. Number 8. Earth 9591, Ruins. This alternate reality is going to be the most recent one, taking place in the 90s. The timing of this one doesn't factor so much into its story though, as the more relevant detail is that this is the universe where literally everything goes wrong. The entire Fantastic Four, except Ben Grimm, who was replaced by Victor Von Doom, died on their test flight. The X-Men are held in a prison in Texas where they are horribly disfigured to stop them from using their powers. Peter Parker's spider bite caused an infectious rash that mutated his entire body and caused his hair to fall out. Bruce Banner becomes a monstrous mass of tumors. The Avengers all died in a rebellion. The Silver Surfer went mad, wanting to know what it was like to breathe air again. Nick Fury became a cannibal. All sort of that really lovely stuff, you know? I would not read this story unless you're okay with being upset, but I would read this story because it's good and it's interesting. Number 7. Earth 6799, 1967 Spider-Man cartoon. Bouncing off that happy little lovely tale, we have Earth 6799, or just Earth 67, which is actually the Earth where the 1967 Spider-Man takes place. Because of that, this Earth technically first appeared in Spider-Man Episode 1 Season 1 on September 9th, 1967. Its comic book appearance first comes in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 3, number 9, as one of the many alternate Spider-Man featured in this story. He also shows up in Spider-Verse Team-Up issue number 2 when Miles Morales and Peter Parker come to this Earth to find Spider-Man and recruit him to the fight against the Inheritors. It's super entertaining. Number 6. Earth 84243, Conan in the modern day's 70s. Some people may not know this, but Conan the Barbarian is actually part of Marvel Comics. And while the era he lived in, the Hyborian Age, is part of the 616 continuity, the What If story on Earth 79213 isn't. Instead of being in the Hyborian Age though, our boy Conan gets stuck in the 20th century. After visiting the Hyborian trade city of Akbitana, he is captured by a wizard who specializes in time travel. And instead of escaping, he is transported to Manhattan on July 13th, 1977. What does he decide to do with himself? Well, after scaring off some punks and throwing an old lady in a trash can, he has a romantic encounter with a modern age lady, Danette, who shows him the Guggenheim Museum, which reminds him of an ancient citadel, and they go to investigate. Here, he fights off some muggers and then gets struck by magical lightning that transports him back through time to his Hyborian age. But at least he got to keep Danette's cap as a reminder of their romance. Number 5. Earth 15513, 1872. Technically, Earth 15513 is Battleworld, which is actually part of the modern Secret Wars story. The pocket dimension of the Valley of Doom is made of another Earth's version of the Wild West, mainly the town of Timely. Timely is run by its mayor, Wilson Fisk, and his enforcers, who ultimately answer to Governor Roxxon. Stephen Rogers is the sheriff in this here town, and he's a bitter but just man after the death of his deputy, Bucky Barnes. Anthony Stark is the town drunk, regretful of how his weapons were used in the Civil War. Natasha Romanoff is the widow of Bucky, with Bruce Banner being the doctor of the town. The new hero, Red Wolf, tries blowing up the Roxxon Dam, which almost results in his lynching, if it weren't for Sheriff Stephen Rogers, who saves him. Conflict blossoms when the agents of Roxxon, Bullseye, Grizzly, Elektra, and Dr. Octopus arrive in town and start running amok. Another story you have to read. I promise the steampunk looking Iron Man will not disappoint you. Number 4, Earth 717, Captain America in the Civil War. The What If stories are so cool. In What If Captain America, Stephen Rogers actually fought in the American Civil War instead of World War II as General America, given powers from an ancient Native American eagle that also turned an evil racist Bucky Barnes into the White Skull, who became the leader of a white supremacist group. Because of General America's involvement in the Civil War, the Union won the war a year earlier than it normally would have. Abraham Lincoln survived his second term in office. He helped rebuild the South, suppressed the rise of a certain group of hooded racists, and prevented the Indian Wars from ever happening. He would go on to fight the White Skull and his new, deadlier hate group, eventually being succeeded by a line of Captain Americas who were his descendants. Number 3. Earth 90214, Marvel Noir. In this alternate version of Earth, superheroes debuted in the 1920s and 30s instead of their normal timing. This Earth 90214 brought us Marvel Noir, with subsequent noir versions of Punisher, Wolverine, Iron Man, Daredevil, Luke Cage, the X-Men, and most famously, Spider-Man. Each story is a fresh, unique, and awesome take on each character, seeing how superpowers in this world are pretty much non-existent except for a few characters. For example, Spider-Man was bitten by a spider, but instead of being based in science, his powers derived from a spider god. Or Wolverine didn't actually have claws, he just carries like brass knuckle blade things. Another example would be the X-Men, who are actually a group of sociopathic criminals, led by an Xavier who believed sociopathy was the future of the human species, which is just incredible. Number 2, Earth 811, Days of Future Past. Earth 811 is a future timeline where Sentinels rule over North America. After their creation, almost all mutants have been hunted and exterminated. The mutants that were not killed are kept in concentration camps. Even the heroes who aren't mutants have been exterminated. The Avengers, the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, Daredevil, they're all gone. But hey, this is the future, not the past. Yeah, I'm getting there, okay? Rachel Summers, the daughter of Jean Grey and Scott Summers, uses her telepathic powers to send Kitty Pryde's mind back into her younger self's body. Specifically, Kitty's mind went all the way back to the Halloween of 1980, where she informed the X-Men of what their future could become, and they prevented the assassination of Robert Kelly. The story is a whole lot more complex than that, and is also one of the most prized Marvel stories, so give it a read! Number 1. Earth 311, Marvel 1602. Okay, Marvel 1602 is my absolute favorite Marvel alternate universe. Fun fact, it was the first Marvel writing escapade for superstar fantasy writer Neil Gaiman. The universe actually got its start in a different alternate reality, Earth 460, where Purple Man became president for life. Most heroes had been hunted down or had died from old age, but after Captain America is captured, he is banished away to Earth 616's 1599, shortly before Roanoke was formed, which inadvertently created Earth 311. For some reason, the presence of Captain America destabilized reality and began the emergence of heroes and villains into this world who are counterparts to many of the present-day heroes and villains of the Marvel Universe. Count Otto von Doom the Handsome, Witchbreed, which are mutants, Grand Inquisitor Enrique, which is Magneto, Carlos Xavier, which is Charles Xavier, Four from the Fantastic, Sir Nicholas Fury, Peter Parquois, David Banner. The story is so interesting, intertwining actual history with superpowered beings. I highly recommend you give it a read if you haven't already.
Number 10. Helena Wayne as Huntress. Before Helena Bertinelli was Huntress, we had Helena Wayne. Helena Wayne was the daughter of Bruce Wayne and Selina Kyle, Batman and Catwoman respectively. Although she didn't come from a crime family, she was still heavily trained by her parents, and eventually took up the mantle Huntress as a vigilante. Like the main continuity Huntress, she was also known for being more violent than was considered acceptable. After her mother's death, she moved out and blaming the criminal Silky Cernak for her mother's death, as he had blackmailed Selina into returning to a life of crime as Catwoman. Helena Wayne set out for revenge. Catwoman died when she returned to her life of crime. No. Mom, why? Number 9. Venom. Venom would technically make its first appearance in issue 252 of volume 1 of the Amazing Spider-Man series, but it wouldn't be until almost 50 issues later in issue 299 that the suit would develop a mind of its own, or well, find its own mind with that of Eddie Brock's mind, and be introduced to us again as Venom. Once Eddie had got his hands on the suit, he began to plot sweet, sweet revenge on Peter Parker. But during his first appearance, Peter, who was also rocking a black and white suit at the time, albeit not the symbiotic one, I know, confusing, was not at home, so instead Venom ran into MJ in her and Peter's apartment, scaring her senseless. Eddie would go on to terrorize Peter, but the two would at times reluctantly team up to take on even bigger bads, as despite being kind of a bad guy, Eddie had sort of a moral code. He definitely didn't like to kill innocent civilians and tried to avoid that when possible, though also he sometimes did that. The two teamed up to take on villains like Carnage, and eventually Eddie would become a hero in his own right. He's probably got one of the best story arcs in comics because of his gradual transformation since introduction as Venom in '88, from complete villain to, well, complete anti-hero. Maybe even like full-on hero now. I don't know. What do you guys think? Is Venom a full hero yet? Can we go there? Number 8. John Constantine. Constantine made his first appearance in Swamp Thing Volume 2, Issue 37. He is known as an occult detective from England who likes to do things his own way. He's somewhat violent and reckless, with somewhat of a disregard for the smaller things. To John, sometimes you have to break a few eggs or sacrifice a few souls to make an omelet. And as long as it's for the greater good, he's sometimes fine with that. In his own series Hellblazer, which started in 1988 and ran for over 300 issues, the original tone of the series was quite dark, because the series also came out as part of DC's Vertigo line, which was known for being one of the darkest imprints that DC ever had. Of course, sadly, Vertigo is no more, but in its place we now have the stunning DC Black Label, so I guess it's fine. Just kidding. DC Black Label's really awesome. But still, can't we have both? Can't we have both DC? Number 7. V. V comes to us from Alan Moore and David Lloyd's series V for Vendetta. He's a mysterious character who is also known as Patient Number 5, who is said to be one of the many victims of abuse in a resettlement camp run by the fascist and villainous Norsefire-ruled government. It is believed that V was a test subject at the camp who escaped. He then adopted the mantle V and began to work on building an anarchistic uprising to topple the oppressive regime. His methods were meant to appear morally ambiguous so that readers could decide how to see him, as a hero or as a madman. V made his first appearance in the series Warrior in issue number 1. Also, if you haven't checked out that little story that he's in Warrior, V for Vendetta, it's really great. Just saying. Also, the series is great. Number 6. Black Cat. Black Cat was first introduced in The Amazing Spider-Man Volume 1 issue 194 as a thief, and she continued to be that for quite a while, but she was also introduced as a love interest for Spider-Man at the same time, which she would also continue to be for some time. Distracting Spidey with a kiss, she was able to get away with the goods she needed and succeeded in breaking her dad out of jail as a result, though we wouldn't learn her dad's connection to her until the next issue. Being a mysterious figure with self-serving motives has always left her painted as an anti-hero, even when she has heroic intentions at heart. Although Felicia Hardy has played both sides before as well, being a full-on hero and a full-on criminal at times. Number 5. Punisher. Probably one of the most iconic when it comes to the idea of what an anti-hero is. Frank Castle was also one of the first. It's likely because of him as well that the idea of seeking revenge became a somewhat dark one. The Punisher's main quest is to get vengeance, not just for himself, but for others whom he thinks deserve it. Originally, he turned to a life of vigilantism after the death of his family, who happened to be on a picnic at the wrong place, the wrong time, and were witnesses to something they shouldn't have been. As such, they were eliminated by the mob. Despite also being shot, Frank survived the attack, though the rest of his family died, and as a result, he swore revenge. He's also known for being an overly violent hero who fights with guns, which is something most heroes look down upon, preferring to use non-lethal force. The Punisher would achieve next-level anti-hero status when he also became the first anti-hero to kill the entire Marvel Universe in 1995, in Punisher Kills the Marvel Universe, paving the way for another popular anti-hero, Deadpool, to also do so years later. Of course, it would take Deadpool until the 2000s before that would even be a thing for him. The 2010s, as it were, actually. Number 4. Wolverine. Logan, being considered a little more rough around the edges and animalistic, is what quickly granted him an anti-hero status. As far as superheroes go, he was different. He made his first full appearance in The Incredible Hulk Volume 1 issue 181. Since the beginning, his violent nature and broodiness has made him both well-loved by fans, but sometimes disliked by other heroes. He also has less hang-ups when it comes to killing people, even suggesting at times that it's the best course of action when dealing with villains, and having a pretty big thing for mercy killing when it comes to other heroes. This has also made Logan one of the biggest anti-heroes in the X-Men world. He just kills tons of people. People will be like, I think I'm gonna die, and he's like, I got you, don't worry. I'll make it quick. Number 3. Magneto. Magneto has been known as the foil to X-Men's Professor Xavier for years. Xavier was also the leader of the X-Men, while Magneto was the leader of the first Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, who were often the X-Men's enemies. Still, Magneto does what he does often to make the life of mutants better, albeit through punishing humanity, which, you know, not so great. And while he has spent a lot of time being a villain, over the years he has definitely shifted more to anti-hero, especially in the new Dawn of X mutant relaunch, where he often works alongside Charles. Though Charles is always like, calm down, man. And he's like, no! I will slightly overreact, because I'm Magneto, and that's what I do. Number 2. Catwoman. Catwoman has always operated more on the edge of what's right and wrong since her introduction, which is part of the huge appeal when it comes to her, and has been part of a huge problem in regards to her on and off again relationship with Batman. Though Batman wasn't really a saint either when it came to his early days, but anyways. When Catwoman first appeared in Batman Volume 1 issue number 1, it was as a jewel thief, and Batman at the time was engaged to a woman named Julie. Still, he was tempted to join her and become her king of crime, but when he refused her, she managed to escape his clutches, sneaking away. Batman really hoped that he'd run into her again despite her criminal tendencies, and despite the fact that he was engaged, and his wish would eventually be granted. Catwoman would even team up with Batman and join him in his acts of heroism, though originally it would often be for her own motives alone, but she became more of a hero as time went on. Number 1. Namor. Namor is an interesting one. When he first debuted in Motion Picture Funnies Weekly, it was as a young prince attacking land dwellers, seeking revenge for his people. He would then go on to join the fight in World War II, fighting against Nazis with heroes such as Captain America. Later, he would forget who he was and only regain his memories when he was accidentally knocked into the ocean in the original Fantastic Four series by Johnny Storm. He would then rediscover who he was and that the kingdom that had been his underwater home had been destroyed by the Humans' War's nuclear bomb tests, and as a result would attack the land, becoming a villain. Again. Since then, he has done a variety of good and not always so good things, but what remains constant is that Namor's methods have pretty much always been questionable. His return to being good, but in his own way, and still while thinking very highly of himself, made him an anti-hero. And while he is very passionate about protecting his people, there is no doubt that this means he would also do anything to safeguard Atlantis, regardless of how morally ambiguous or severe it might be.
Number 10. Daredevil. No, not that Daredevil. This Daredevil is Bart Hill, who witnessed his father's murder before the killer branded him with a hot iron, making him mute with shock. He learned to become an expert boomerang thrower and became a costumed crime fighter. He was later rendered unmute with no explanation, and honestly isn't that interesting. He actually appeared after Superman, but fell into the public domain and has therefore been used by several different publishers, although they often change his name to avoid conflicts with the Marvel legal team. Number 9. Miss Fury. First appearing in 1941 in newspaper strips published by Bell Syndicate, Marla Drake was a wealthy socialite who was attending a party when she discovered that another woman was wearing the same outfit as her. In order to prevent embarrassment, she changed into a ceremonial panther skin outfit that her uncle had taken from Africa and willed to her. The suit of course granted her superpowers, which she used to fight crime and achieve a level of cultural appropriation most white people can only dream of. Talk about my culture is not a costume. Her powers are basic acrobatic, climbing, and fighting powers, and she was known for using her claws and whip against her enemies. She actually didn't use the suit very often, as her manservant, a Brazilian albino Indian named Albino Joe, Jesus Christ. Well, he warned her that every favor that was gained through black magic would result with 2 misfortunes. Her comic strip appearances were later compiled by the company that would one day become Marvel, Timely Comics. This has made the rights to her a little hard to follow, as she is considered canon to the Marvel universe, but also has appeared in comics published by both Malibu and Dynamite Comics. What makes her notable is that Miss Fury was the first female superhero to actually be created by a woman. Alright, that's all of the characters who you could argue were part of the Golden Age. From here on out, all of the entries were created before Superman first appeared in June 1938. Number 8. Doc Savage. Doc Savage, the Man of Bronze, first appeared in Doc Savage magazine number 1 in 1933, 5 whole years before Superman. He appeared in pulp magazines, which would tell the stories of the character in prose with some illustrations, rather than in a purely visual medium as comics would end up doing later. In 2016, Stan Lee actually went on record as saying that Doc Savage was the forerunner to modern superheroes as we know them. Doc Savage's story is that his father assembled a group of scientists who were all experts in their fields to train his son almost from birth to make him a perfect human specimen who is at peak human condition and is a master martial artist and scientist, physician, inventor, explorer, and detective. He was raised in the jungle where he received a really intense tan, earning him the nickname the Man of Bronze. After his father was killed, he decided to devote himself to fighting crime, traveling the world and battling criminals. He is extremely rich and has a base in the Arctic that he calls the Fortress of Solitude. He is aided by a team of friends known as the Fabulous Five, who are all experts in their scientific fields, but of course not as expert as Doc Savage is. In his third appearance in 1933, Quest of the Spider, he is referred to as a Superman by one of his colleagues. Doc Savage has appeared in pulp novels, radio stories, and movies over the years, but isn't nearly as well known as the hero he inspired. He has made comic appearances for both Marvel, DC, and Dark Horse over the years. Number 7. The Green Hornet. This is a character you are likely at least aware of due to the Seth Rogen movie and the classic 60s television show starring Bruce Lee, but the Green Hornet's history goes back even further than that. First appearing in his own radio series in 1936, the Green Hornet is really Britt Reed, the owner of the Daily Sentinel newspaper. At night, the Green Hornet fights evil with the help of his driver, Kato, Magneto in their supercar, the Black Beauty. What makes the Hornet unique is that he pretends to be a criminal so that he can infiltrate the various gangs of his city in order to take them down. In a fun bit of lore building, Britt's father is actually Dan Reed Jr., the nephew of the Lone Ranger. The Green Hornet made the jump from radio to the big screen in 1940, appearing in 2 serials, The Green Hornet and The Green Hornet Strikes Again. He appeared from time to time in his own comic book series, which adapted his radio stories, but his most iconic appearance was in the 1966 television show, which starred Van Williams as the Hornet and Bruce Lee as Kato. The show was made by the same team who made the 60s Batman show, but employed a more serious tone than the campy Batman show. It lasted for 1 season, but has managed to stay in the public consciousness, being the main inspiration for the 2011 film. The license for Green Hornet comics is currently with Dynamite Comics, who have taken him back to his Depression-era roots. If you want to familiarize yourself with the Hornet's sting, might I recommend Chuck Wagner's Green Hornet Year 1. Number 6. The Shadow. Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The Shadow knows! First created in 1930, The Shadow was originally the narrator of the Detective Story Hour radio program, which was created to help boost the sales of Detective Story magazine. People began asking the newsstand vendors for that Shadow Detective magazine, and the publishers decided to develop an actual character for the narrator and give him his own pulp magazine series, The Shadow Magazine, which by 1937 received its own radio series. There was some inconsistencies between the character in the radio program and magazine appearances, so we'll go with the more well-known version of the story. The Shadow is a man who has traveled the world and learned how to cloud men's minds and become invisible, hiding in the shadows to attack criminals. He has taken over the life of a wealthy playboy named Lamont Cranston, whose identity he uses to fund his exploits and gather intel from his friend, the police commissioner. If this sounds kinda Batman-y to you, then you would be right, as the Shadow was a major influence on Batman's modus operandi. In fact, the Shadow story, Partners of Peril, was lifted almost verbatim by Bob Kane when he wrote the first Batman story featured in Detective Comics number 27. Both feature the hero investigating a series of murders of a group of businessmen who own a chemical syndicate together. Both feature the hero getting trapped under a glass dome that fills with gas that they then plug with a handkerchief, proving once again that Bob Kane was a talentless hack who would have never been remembered if it weren't for Bill Finger. The Shadow has appeared in pulp magazines and radio dramas and films over the years. His most recent feature film was in 1994, starring Alec Baldwin as the title character. It's actually pretty underrated. The character is currently licensed to Dynamite Comics and has a pretty extensive catalog of appearances available for readers. Number 5. The Phantom. The Phantom first appeared in comic strips in 1936 in the fictional African country of Bangala after a castaway whose ship was attacked by pirates washed up on shore and was adopted by the locals. He swore revenge on all evildoers and developed the persona of the Ghost Who Walks, otherwise known as the Phantom. The mantle is passed down through generations, with each new Phantom being sworn to protect the jungles of Bangala. The Phantom whose adventures are most commonly followed is Kit Walker, the 21st Phantom. Although his purple costume might come across as silly, he was the first hero to wear skin-tight clothes and a mask which obscured the pupils, leaving only the white eyes, something that is of course a staple of masked superheroes now. He is also known for wearing 2 rings, one of which he uses to leave a skull-shaped mark on the villains he punches. The Phantom has appeared in comics, novels, serials, and a live-action movie in 1996 starring Billy Zane. Number 4. The Spider. The Spider was created in 1933 to be a direct competitor to the Shadow. He is really millionaire Richard Wentworth, who disguises himself in early appearances by wearing a mask, a wig, and a false hunchback. He has no issues with killing his enemies and always used his ring to leave a spider-shaped mark on his victims' foreheads so no one but him would be blamed for his actions. He is aided by his manservant Ram Singh and is a master of disguise, adopting several aliases in order to infiltrate and gather information. His stories are notable for being extremely violent, with the various villains' death tolls routinely going into the thousands by the end of each story. He was the first pulp hero to be given a live-action serial in 1938, where he was given a new look that featured a red spiderweb, which helped to distinguish him from the Shadow. In the years since his pulp novel appearances, the Spider has been featured in comic book series published by Eclipse Comics, Moonstone Books, and Dynamite Entertainment, who adopted Spider's serial costume to the page for the character. Number 3. Black Bat. There are actually two Black Bats. The first, from 1933, who was a roaming detective who left bat-themed calling cards, and the more popular one from 1939, who debuted around the same time as Batman. Anthony Quinn was a district attorney until one day in court someone threw a vial of acid in his face, which disfigured and blinded him. In the words of Tobey Maguire, it looks very, similar. The attack blinded Quinn, but fortunately a police officer who is dying from gangsters' bullets donates his eyes to Quinn. After the surgery, Quinn is not only able to see normally, but can also see in the dark. He becomes a costumed crime fighter who leaves bat-shaped stickers on his victims, so much like the Spider, no one else is blamed for his crimes. Because he and Batman hit the stands around the same time, both publishers sued each other, but the editor of DC Comics, Whitney Ellsworth, managed to broker an agreement that made both companies leave each other free to publish bat-themed stories, although Batman certainly is the more well-remembered of the two. Number 2. Sheena, Queen of the Jungle. Debuting in January 1938, a full 6 months before Superman, is Sheena, the very first female superhero to receive her own self-titled book. Sheena was an orphan who was raised by an African witch doctor who taught her how to survive and various African languages. She grew up in the jungle and learned to communicate with its animals. She eventually becomes friends with a hunter named Bob Reynolds, and the two protect the jungle from giants, dinosaurs, cults, vampire apes, and everything else under the sun. Sheena was co-created by Jerry Iger and comics legend Will Eisner, and appeared in comics and pulp novels and received her own TV series in 1955 and 2000, and a live-action film titled simply Sheena in 1984. She is also the inspiration for both Tina Turner's stage persona and the Ramones song Sheena is a Punk Rocker. Like many of the pre-Golden Age heroes on this list, she is currently licensed to Dynamite Entertainment, who released new comics about this classic hero. Number 1. Mandrake the Magician. First appearing in newspaper strips in 1934, several historians credit Mandrake, not the Man of Steel, as being the first comic book superhero. He is a stage magician who uses hypnotic gestures to make people see illusions, which he of course also uses to help him fight crime. He has the power to teleport, shapeshift, levitate, and to become invisible. His hat and wand possess great magic and were passed down to him by his father, Theron. He fights both criminals and supernatural threats, aliens, and figures from other dimensions. He's like Zatanna and Doctor Strange rolled into one. Mandrake appeared in comic strips until 2013, but never really had his own comic books, aside from reprints and a few miniseries, one of which was actually released by Marvel. He has guest starred in stories for the Phantom and Flash Gordon, and a series featuring a new character taking up the mantle called Legacy of Mandrake the Magician, which was released in 2020 by Red 5 Comics. He appeared in his own movie serial in 1939, and there have been a few attempts to adapt the character for film and television, but none have panned out. Number 10. Fu Manchu. This villain is more remembered for the facial hair he inspired and for being an incredibly offensive stereotype than he is for his fictional acts of villainy. Fu Manchu was created all the way back in 1912 by an English author named Sax Rohmer after he asked a Ouija board how he would make his fortune, and I swear this is true, the board spelled out a racial slur that inspired him to come up with the character. Dr. Fu Manchu has studied at various universities and has 4 doctorates. He is a crime boss who uses members of various secret societies as his enforcers, as well as various dangerous exotic animals like cobras and spiders to attack his enemies. His goal is to take over the world so that he can restore China to its former glory. He has a daughter named Falo Sui who is frequently trying to usurp him by teaming up with the heroes who are trying to defeat him. He is most frequently paired against the heroes of the novels, Dennis Nayland Smith and Dr. Petrie. He is one of the first supervillains in fiction, but his legacy is far overshadowed by the fact that he is directly responsible for starting the yellow panic trope in fiction, where Asian characters began being consistently written as plotting and dangerous masterminds trying to bring down the white man. He has had a permanent impact on fiction as a result, inspiring other dicey characters like Marvel's The Mandarin. Number 9. The Fly. The problem with having heroes who kill their villains is that you don't get many recurring enemies as a result. This is especially true for the pulp hero known as the Spider, who is a millionaire who dresses up in a disguise and brutally murders his opponents. He is a character known for his bloodlust, kind of like the Punisher of his time, but one of the few villains who managed to give the Spider any repeated trouble was the Fly. First appearing in the August 1934 issue of Spider magazine in the story Prince of the Red Looters, the Fly is also a wealthy playboy who has become bored and decides to take up crime as a hobby. At the story's start, he has killed 4 men and stolen $50,000. Despite most of the criminal underworld being terrified of the Spider, the Fly places an ad in the paper with an invitation saying, "Won't you come into my parlor?" The two meet and the Fly challenges the Spider to a sword fight. The two men are evenly matched and the Fly eventually pulls a gun, but being the sporting type, he doesn't kill him and instead ties the Spider up and leaves him for the police. The Fly goes on to rob a bank, leaving a massive trail of carnage in his wake. He is smart enough to deduce that the Spider is really Richard Wentworth and makes several assassination attempts on him. He sends his stolen goods in the mail to the various gangsters of the city in order to earn their support and uses his newfound syndicate to rob several banks across the city. By the end of the story, the Spider and the Fly engage in another sword fight that seems to end with the Fly's death, but in a move that was highly unusual in the Spider magazine, he returned a year and a half later in the story Green Globes of Death, where he developed gas weapons that caused his victims to bleed from every pore. As I mentioned in my hero version of this video, Spider stories were incredibly violent, with death tolls routinely going into the thousands by the end of each book. Number 8. Voodoo Master. One of the recurring foes of the Shadow is Dr. Rodil McQuino, who has hypnotic powers that he has attained through the use of black magic, which allow him to take control of people's minds and make them a part of his mindless zombie-like horde. He used these abilities to come to New York and start a cult, which he used to attain wealth. This brought him into conflict with the Shadow, who shot him and presumed him dead. Unfortunately, Voodoo Master returned and began an experiment which he planned to run on the entire human race. He planned to gain a massive amount of followers in the United States, but felt that the machine age was making this more difficult to accomplish. So, once he settled in the town of Hampstead and began enacting his scheme, he also began destroying the city's various factories. The Voodoo Master made 3 appearances in the original Shadow magazine stories before being permanently killed off, but he is also a recurring character in the Dynamite Entertainment comic book series featuring the Shadow. Number 7. The Sky Band. The Sky Band are a gang of villains who battle the pulp hero known as the Phantom in several stories throughout the character's history. The Sky Band are an all-female group of sky pirates who terrorize the air. They are led by a woman named the Baroness, who has an unrequited love for the Phantom despite them being on opposite sides of the law. Another member of the gang, named Sala, is also in love with the Phantom, and frequently comes into contact and/or conflict with the hero many times throughout his storied history, and once the Baroness dies in her first appearance, Sala takes over the gang. They are a mainstay of the Phantom mythology, appearing in the original comic strips, the comic books published by Gold Key, Charlton, DC, Marvel, Moonstone, and Dynamite Comics. They also appeared in an episode of the Defenders of the Earth cartoon, which featured the Phantom fighting alongside Mandrake the Magician and Flash Gordon in space, although in this version they were of course space pirates. Their most notable appearance is probably in the 1996 movie starring Billy Zane, where Sala was played by Catherine Zeta-Jones. Number 6. Dr. Death. There are actually 2 Dr. Deaths. The first one was a recurring villain of a rather boring hero named Nibs Holloway, who was a troubleshooter for a jewelry company. This Dr. Death was an international criminal who of course stole jewelry. He died at the end of his first appearance, but due to reader interest was brought back for a second story. He died again, before being resurrected for one more time for a 4th and final story. The character proved more popular than the hero, and being that it was difficult to come up with scenarios where a jewelry store troubleshooter would come into conflict with an over-the-top supervillain, a new Dr. Death was created and given his own book. The new Dr. Death was a mad scientist named Dr. Rance Mandarin, who used to be the Dean of Psychology at Yale before he lost his mind and decided that he would use both scientific and occult methods to kill as many people as possible, believing that the world was becoming overpopulated. His enemy was a supernatural detective named Jimmy Holm, who would stop all the Doctor's plans and eventually marry his niece, Nina. Number 5. Ming the Merciless. When the Earth was bombarded by a series of meteors, Dr. Hans Zarkov built a spaceship to locate the meteor's planet of origin. he set off to space with a woman named Dale Arden and a man named Flash Gordon in tow. They traveled to the planet Mongo, which they discovered was being ruled by an evil emperor named Ming the Merciless. Ming immediately wanted to marry Dale and forced Flash to fight in his gladiatorial battle arena. He became a staple of the Flash Gordon mythos and has appeared in every subsequent version of the series, from the original 1934 comic strips to the subsequent film serials of 1936, 38, and 1940. He went up against Flash and the gang again in the 1979 and 1996 animated series, as well as the 1986 Defenders of the Earth series and a 2007 live-action series for the Sci-Fi Channel. Although he is perhaps most well known to modern audiences for his appearance in the 1980 feature film where he was played by Max von Sydow. He has a bit of a complicated legacy, as he is clearly inspired by negative Asian stereotypes like Fu Manchu, but since he's technically an alien, this issue has been avoided in certain adaptations by making him a generic white dude in the 2007 series, or a green reptilian alien in the Defenders of the Earth series. Number 4. Shiwan Khan. Alright, this is the last of the Yellow Peril style villains on this list. The Shadow's arch nemesis, Shiwan Khan, has a kinda funny backstory, as in the pulp novels he is said to be the last living descendant of Genghis Khan. Of course, due to DNA testing, we now know that Genghis Khan had so many children that 1 in 200 people alive today are descended from him. But let's go with it. Shiwan is intent on living up to his ancestors' legacy by conquering as much of the world as possible. He operated out of the lost city of Xanadu, where he was trained by Tibetan monks who taught him how to harness his telepathic powers and become invisible, clairvoyant, and how to control the dead. Shiwan Khan is far and away the most often recurring shadow villain, appearing in pulp stories The Golden Master, Shiwan Khan Returns, The Invincible Shiwan Khan, and Masters of Death. He's also appeared at some point in every subsequent comic book iteration of the Shadow, including those published by Archie Comics, DC Comics, Dark Horse Comics, and Dynamite Entertainment. He's also the main antagonist of the 1994 live-action Alec Baldwin starring Shadow movie. Number 3. John Sunlight. Doc Savage, the Man of Bronze, who has an Arctic headquarters called the Fortress of Solitude and whose first name is Clark, is an obvious source of inspiration for Superman. Although he doesn't have actual superpowers and was instead trained from birth to be an expert in almost every field and to achieve peak human condition. He is an incredibly effective pulp hero, and as a result never really had many repeat villains other than John Sunlight, who managed to survive his first encounter with Doc Savage only to be killed in his second appearance. John Sunlight is the only character who can match Savage in intelligence and even overcome him in strength. As a result, the two have an immense respect for each other, even if they are enemies. He has the ability to hypnotize all but the most intelligent of men, and his goal is to end world hunger, war, and intolerance. Unfortunately, he wants to do this by becoming the ruler of the world, so this doesn't really gel with Savage's goals. In the first story, The Fortress of Solitude, he escaped from an Arctic Russian prison before he came across Doc's fortress, which was filled with Savage's most deadly inventions. He began selling these weapons to rival armies who were at war. At the end of this adventure, Savage came across remains that seemed to imply that Sunlight had been eaten by a polar bear, but it was actually Sunlight who ended the bear and went on to try and get his revenge on Savage in the story The Devil Genghis, where the hypnotized masses turned on him and tore him limb from limb. The character has appeared in the years since in several of the various Doc Savage comic books that have come out in the years since. Number 2. Dr. Satan. Weird Tales magazine is best known for publishing the stories of authors like Seabury Quinn and H.P. Lovecraft. And though they did publish a few recurring characters, they didn't really go in for the hero or villain pulps that would one day evolve into the superheroes we know today. However, they did have one hero and villain pair that they would publish 8 adventures of between 1933 and 1934. The hero was an occult detective named Ascot Keene, but it was the more colorful villain who received top billing. Dr. Satan. Dr. Satan would use occult magic in order to enact criminal schemes, such as causing plants to grow out of men's skulls and reanimating dead bodies to pose as kidnap victims in order to extort people for money. Although we never learned his true identity, we did learn that he is actually just a rich playboy who learned magic and turned to crime out of boredom. This character has fallen into the public domain, so you could make your own Dr. Satan stories and no one could stop you. Number 1. Superman. Fans of the Man of Steel may know that Superman was created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster and first appeared in Action Comics #1 in 1938, before taking the world by storm and becoming one of the most enduring and iconic pop culture icons of all time. What not everyone is aware of is that Clark Kent was not the first Superman that Siegel and Shuster created. In 1933, 5 years before Action Comics #1, the pair published a short story in issue 3 of the fanzine Science Fiction: The Advance Guard of Future Civilization, under the pseudonym of Herbert S. Fine. The character was a poor, bald man named Bill Dunn who was in a breadline before being selected by a scientist to be the subject of an experiment. The chemicals that the professor made Bill ingest granted him telepathic powers, and he killed the scientist. This Superman decides to use his powers to conquer the world, but soon discovers that the effects of the potion are temporary, and without the scientist, he will soon be a poor nobody on the breadlines once again. Siegel and Shuster would end up reusing the name when they created their more famous character, but the two would eventually introduce another bald villain for the new Superman to fight.
Number 10. Lasher. Lasher was created when a company called the Life Foundation forcibly extracted 5 offspring from Venom. You see, during the Cold War, the Life Foundation believed that a nuclear holocaust was coming and wanted to create a superpowered police force to protect this new world, or, utopia that they were creating. That's when they decided that a symbiote police force would probably be the best option. One of those 5 symbiotes was Lasher. Lasher merged with Ramon Hernandez and is known for his green color and the tentacles on his back, which, was his primary attack, and for the most part, it was very effective. Number 9. Phage. Also one of the ones created because of the Life Foundation, Phage bonded with Karl Mack. Phage is known for his orange and black appearance and being able to mold his body into sharp blades, similar, to Carnage, which was effective against his opponents. He's also one of the larger symbiotes. He has a build that is very similar to Venom, which along with those blades would make, a really deadly combo. Number 8. Agony. Agony, also a Life Foundation creation, bonded with Leslie Jasnira. Agony was unique in that she was able to spit acid that could burn through almost anything. Agony also had the power to absorb and regurgitate chemicals. Oh god. It's so gross. She also had a very different look than her siblings. She was bright purple with hints of black and had wavy hair. Of course, she also had sharp teeth and massive claws. Number 7. Riot. Riot is, well you guessed it, another symbiote created because of the Life Foundation. Riot bonded with Trevor Cole, who was a mercenary. Riot took on a very similar appearance to Venom. His build, size, and color scheme were all very similar. He's also considered to be the most violent of the Life Foundation creations. Riot is also the only one of his siblings to make a live action appearance, so far. He was the main antagonist in the 2018 film Venom. Now, in the film, he didn't actually merge with Trevor Cole, instead he went with the head of the Life Foundation, Carlton Drake. Who knows? Maybe we'll see some of Riot's siblings in future films. Number 6. Scream. Can I get created because of Life Foundation for 500? Oh, thank you. Scream ended up bonding with human Donna Diego. Scream's color scheme is also very unique, at least for symbiotes. Scream is yellow and black. Also, it is believed that Scream is the strongest of the symbiotes that were extracted from Venom. The reason being is that even though, she was eventually defeated, she took out and killed the host of the other 4 symbiotes that were created by the Life Foundation. Scream also used her long, flowing hair as a weapon, whipping it and slicing her foes. Number 5. Hybrid. Have you ever wondered what would happen if 4 symbiotes merged together? Well, that is exactly what Hybrid is. Hybrid is Riot, Phage, Lasher, and Agony merged into one. All 4 of their hosts were killed by their sibling Scream. Hybrid merged with Scott Washington, who was a guardsman at the prison The Vault, where all 4 of them were actually being held. Now, Scott ended up realizing these 4 symbiotes weren't actually all that evil, and that the experiments that were being done on them were actually causing them a great deal of pain. So, he decided to free them, and he got fired for it. They eventually bonded with him, and because of that, Scott actually regained the ability to walk. You see, years earlier there was a shooting that killed his brother and left him paralyzed. He wanted to go after the people that caused this and kill them, but get this, the symbiotes actually told him not to do it. They didn't actually want to kill anyone. So they ended up finding the people responsible and handing them over to the authorities. You see, not all symbiotes are bad. Also, since there were 4 different symbiotes merged into one, Scott had to deal with 4 different personalities. Man, that would be an experience, hearing all those voices in your head. probably make you go a bit crazy. Number 4, All Black the Necrosword. Alright, so this one isn't technically an old symbiote, but it is the oldest symbiote. You get it? You know what I mean? Okay, what I mean by that is, even though it was introduced in Thor God of Thunder #2 in 2013, it was revealed that it is technically the oldest symbiote ever created. It was primarily used by Gore the God Butcher. It was so powerful that it could kill gods and celestial beings, and every time it did kill them, it took their blood and got even stronger. It instantly became a fan favorite, and because of it, we got one of the most popular Thor stories ever written. And, fun fact, it has also been used by Galactus to destroy worlds. I mean, the thing is insanely powerful. Number 3, Toxin. Toxin is one of the newer ones on this list, but of course, that doesn't mean he's actually really new. Toxin debuted all the way back in 2004. Now, since all symbiotes create their offspring alone, they don't actually need to mate with one another. This eventually ends up happening to Carnage. Now, Carnage was naturally worried because each offspring is said to be stronger than their predecessor. Because of that, Carnage was ready to kill it as soon as it was born. Good old Carnage. When Toxin was born, Carnage just couldn't kill it. He did try, but Toxin was just already too powerful, and it ended up bonding with Patrick Mulligan, an NYPD officer. Toxin is also red and has a slim spider-like appearance when he was bonded with Patrick, but later on he ended up bonding with Eddie Brock and grew to be a lot bigger and way scarier. He also has an amazing healing factor and is more resistant to sound and heat than most other symbiotes. Number 2, Carnage. Carnage is the first child of Venom. Carnage is all red and is one of the most powerful and terrifying symbiotes around. Seriously, this guy is what nightmares are made of. And to make matters worse, he bonded with a serial killer, Cletus Cassidy, who we will finally see in live action for the very first time this year in Sony's Venom 2. I mean, fingers crossed it turns out well. I'm really hoping. Okay, but back to the comics. Carnage was created when Venom left behind his offspring in the prison where Eddie Brock was being held. This new symbiote offspring made its way to Eddie's cellmate, Cletus. Cletus then broke out of prison and began murdering a ton of people. No surprise there. Carnage also went on to become one of Spider-Man's greatest foes. Number 1, Venom. The original symbiote. While he may not be the strongest or technically the oldest, Venom is still considered to be the best by a lot of fans. There's a reason people have grown to love symbiotes so much, and it all has to do with this guy. He was first introduced when he bonded with Peter Parker, giving him, the famous black suit. Although, fans weren't instantly happy with Spider-Man's new look. It did become a lot more famous and well liked as time went on. They eventually did make him change back to his, good old red and blue spandex. And the alien symbiote found its way to another host, Eddie Brock. Fans just couldn't get enough of Venom, and to this day, he is regarded as one of the greatest Spider-Man villains of all time. I mean, the guy had his own film in 2018 and it grossed over $856 million at the worldwide box office. And that was with a mixed response. Not a lot of villains could do that.